I mean, to be critical, it's just, it's different.
It's totally legit. Anytime you're doing something different in the face of really established practice, especially in a high risk environment, like it's worthy of criticism and critical, maybe not worthy of criticism, but certainly worthy of critical examination for sure. So yeah, no, I welcome that.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Jacob Racusin, Director of Building Science and Sustainability at New Frameworks in Burlington, Vermont. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Jacob, thanks a million for being on the show. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
It's so great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So I learned about your company originally from your colleague, Ace McCarlton, and I talked to him in episodes 270 and 272. We talked about your business, among other things, but for folks who didn't hear it, can you please explain the New Frameworks business model? And you have a unique company structure, right?
Yes, we're a worker-owned cooperative. We're actually structured as an LLC for those that get into the sort of business side of things there. But yeah, essentially we don't have any employees. We are all co-owners, and there's two tiers of ownership. Folks enter in as trial members. And then after you've been with the company a certain period of time and sort of bought into a certain level, then you can become a full owner. Lots of details in there, but essentially the structure, the business structure is such that everybody is an owner in that tiered ownership structure. And then culturally, that sense of ownership and collective ownership is huge. I think that's where it's sort of experienced and lived, is how that sort of informs our culture and folks' individual buy-in and sort of collective identity around the success of the group.
Jacob, how did you all learn, or was it you who learned about this business model, and what made you want to share the wealth with your colleagues instead of keeping it?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's been, well, I can't take that much credit. I was one of the original members, and so certainly along for the journey since the get-go. But I would say Ace has definitely been holding the torch in terms of the identity, sort of the identity around that business model. But all the original members, we really felt it was the best way for us to achieve our goals. I think just to be the most direct around it. I feel like I can comfortably speak for all of us saying that none of us really had the intention of being business owners. I think we have all various, levels of entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial nature. Some of us more so than others, but none of us was really interested in owning a company, owning it individually. That just wasn't really, this wasn't in our identity or ethos, either individually or as a group. And so the cooperative structure gave us honestly, just the best model for us to bring in really good people and work together. I know it seems a little oversimplistic, but I guess the best analogy I could give is, especially in building science literate folks, when we think about the home building as a system, and you have to see the enclosure working with the mechanical systems, working with the operators, and all those things have to be sort of working in sync. And the best way to achieve a high performance building, sort of taking that a level out, is having the owners and the designers and the builders all working together collaboratively and intentionally, and sort of zoom out one level. And the best way for us to achieve all of our work is in that similarly integrated collaborative model, and the worker owned structure became the best model for us to achieve that.
And so can you talk about what your typical projects are? New homes, remodeling, who are the clients? What are the typical budgets?
Yeah, so I can actually give a little more information about the structure of the business in answer to that, because typical for us is pretty broad. So as our co-op now essentially is broken into a series of different nodes. It's the language that we're using to describe these different sort of smaller companies within the company, or because they're co-ops within the co-op. We have a design team. We have a build team that focuses on our larger new construction and really big sort of deep energy retrofit projects. We have a building performance team that focuses specifically on building performance and renovation repair type work. We have a Griffin Doors is a high performance door product that we build and sell, as well as Griffin Panels, which is our newest node, which is prefabricated structural straw insulated panels. And so the projects really,
Whoa,
all
whoa.
those things are all happening. And so the typical project really depends on which node we're talking about.
There's so much to unpack there. So can you first tell me about the straw bale panels? When did this start, and how do you make those?
Yeah, so that started, that really started, oh gosh, 5, 6 years ago. We started building our first demo panels. We've been aware of prefabricated straw panels for quite a long time. I say Chris Magwood from the Endeavor Center is probably the first person to turn us on to that, but there have been a number of companies building prefab straw out of Europe for quite a long time. And being straw builders in the Northeast, where climate and building conditions is a big consideration, and also recognizing that we were not interested in continuing to drive all over the Northeast to do this work, and wanting to find more ways of bringing this material into more projects and make that able to disperse a bit further and have it be less custom. That's been on our radar for about a decade or so. And again, in a hands-on way, the last 5 or 6 years. I would say a couple of years ago, we did our first full project for another, for a real client and like a real world project down in Massachusetts. We were not able to do the custom build there. They were still really committed to straw, and they agreed to letting their project be sort of the first live beta of the panel project. And that was a terrific success, and we decided to keep going with it. And so it was this past January, February, we really start putting it out into the world a bit more. And right now, I'd say primarily we're using these for our own in-house design build projects, but also for other projects. We have a project right now under construction where we're doing some design support, and then just the panels, and there's another contractor doing the foundation, the rest of the fit out. So yeah, that's been our recent journey.
How big are the panels, and how complete are they?
So the panels they can range in height from 8 to 12, I believe might be the max height that they go, somewhere around there, 11, 12. Don't quote me. Get it? I'm on a video podcast. Just kidding. So yeah, they're somewhere around that height. And the width, we have been holding at a bit of an odd width, 39 inches, which is just responding to the Bale to make the production in the shop as efficient as possible. However, we're on the verge, or at least we're actively exploring being able to snap to a 4-foot module, just to make it a little bit easier on the design side to integrate into more standard designs. They're all sort of custom engineered in-house, and so depending on the nature of, we've kind of run it through a number of different projects that are that panel design, and it varies a little bit depending on the structural loads and what the desired finishes are. The first project we did was Intello on the interior, a vapor variable airtight membrane on the interior of the panel, and 1/2-inch CDX plywood on the exterior. That was then the contractor was able to finish out pretty normally, right? Like a more standard, fit out on both sides. I think the interior on that project got a combination of drywall and wood paneling. The exterior got like a vented rain screen wood cladding regime. The one we're doing right now, and actually the last one we did prior to that, were both fully plastered. And so looking at a couple different...
How does that work when you have to ship them? I mean, that seems like that's a complicating factor, right?
Yeah, for sure. But we use a combination. So the base coat plaster on one side is done in the shop, and the rest is done in the field. And that's mostly just to sort of split the difference. On these projects, it was easy to do that for the sake of being local enough that we could do in field plastering, and that's kind of old hat for us, and felt comfortable. And that gave us a good sort of midway process of sort of splitting the plaster between in the shop and in the field to figure out some of those logistics around shipping and transport and whatnot. But really good temporary stops around the edges of the panels, and then that gets sort of sort of filled in, if you will. The joints get treated in the fields. Relatively straightforward, and our plasters are pretty bomb-proof. I mean, I trust our plaster a whole lot more than I trust drywall. So they're they're pretty rugged for transport. Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah.
How did you become? Would you describe yourself as a designer or a builder?
Yeah, it's it's been a really interesting identity evolution for me. I definitely started as a builder for many, many, many years. At this point, I'm just not producing build projects in the field so much, and I'm running our design studio, so I consider myself more of a designer at this point for sure. But actively am in the fields, either developing projects or troubleshooting the technical sides of our projects pretty regularly. So I'm having a little bit of a hard time letting go of the identity of being a builder, but technically, I'm way more in the design world than the builder world these days for sure.
How did you get into construction?
As an owner builder, I had a really young family, and we definitely had a strong. Actually, both came more from like a sustainable agriculture background. I had a really keen interest in providing, having a working understanding of how to provide the basics for myself and my family: shelter, food, energy. It was as a very young person getting into it, that was a kind of a motivating interest for me. My wife had chemical sensitivities. The market was not great, and so we decided to build our own house and to take the homesteading approach rather than because we weren't finding much on the market for us. So yeah, I started as an owner builder, and about halfway through the process, it was really once we got into the enclosure and I got the bales up and the plaster on, you can kind of see this is my house. So we're looking at, I guess this was back in 2000. I started felling trees and designing. In 2001, dug the hole in the ground. So this is sort of that era. And after getting the plaster on, I realized that I really loved it. It felt really good. It was really enlivening, and I saw that there was a need for more natural building development for this region. And so I followed that for a while and found some other folks, Ben and Ace and some of my other new framework partners, and some folks no longer in that world back in the early aughts, working on natural building assemblies, timber frames and straw wall enclosures and natural plastering and earthen floors and native wood construction, that whole scene. And it basically just kept going. That's the short answer.
Where did the building science? I mean, obviously, when you're doing something a little outside the ordinary, you have to figure it out for yourself. I think you'd agree. So, is that where the building science interest came from?
Yeah, there was actually sort of two things that dovetailed together to really sort of ignite that fire for me. I mean, well, certainly in high school, I was always a sort of liberal arts kind of a kid. I didn't have a tremendous amount of sort of hands-on skill, really very much at all in the trades or in anything really sort of hands-on. I was like a liberal arts and performing arts nerd, but I'd always had this really, really strong curiosity around really understanding how things work, and just really unpacking like why a thing is the way it is has always been really important for me. And so the things that dovetailed practically in terms of that being my focus, one was having built, a dozen of these structures in the region for the better part of a decade or so. We were asked to write a book, and we felt really important before releasing these construction details into the world and releasing our practices in print out into the universe that we do the due diligence of making sure they're actually performing well. And so we worked with a fellow, Brad Cook, who's a building performance analyst in central Vermont, and hired him. So raised a bunch of money and hired him to do a whole battery of moisture and sort of enclosure testing, thermal performance testing on a bunch of the
On your
buildings
own
we had built.
house?
No, on buildings that we had built over the course of the aughts, throughout the
Hmm.
2000s, and just learned so much about what was and wasn't working well about the assemblies, and mostly working well. And really, the things that weren't working very well were largely involved. Things that hadn't been finished, or failures or deficiencies in roofing assemblies or parts of the building we didn't have control over. Some of those pieces, but a lot of probe testing in the walls. Looking at tracking how moisture was moving through the buildings. That was enormously influential for me in terms of sort of sparking my interest in seeing the critical need for having really strong applied building science to validate this work and these construction techniques, both for ourselves internally initially, and then also out to our market and to our industry. And that really dovetailed at the same time of recognizing that just doing, I mean, most of that work was all new construction in largely undeveloped areas, rural areas or suburban lots. And it just felt like that model alone was insufficient for our goals, primarily around social access and economic access to our buildings. Like we just weren't buildings for ourselves or our communities. And so I got really interested in retrofit work and working with existing building infrastructure and bringing those same principles and values to the world of working on existing buildings. So I got BPI certified and started the building performance sort of part of our company right around that same time. And again, that quest for better science-based, data-driven information and making better buildings sort of brought me into that world as well.
Were there folks when you were growing up who were builders or in the trades, or did you have any exposure to that when you were young?
No, my gosh, not at all. I have the most distinct memory of going to summer camp. I went to the farm and wilderness camps in central Vermont growing up. And I remember doing like a shop elective and building a dulcimer and like literally being in tears because I felt like I couldn't figure out how to like clamp the thing to get into glue. Like, oh my God, I can't do this. I felt so unskilled with my hands as a kid. So yeah, no, I remember I went into high school. This has become a really like, informative experience for me. When I went to high school, there was a VOTEC program at the high school. I remember really wanting to go to shop class and check out some of the carpentry classes, but it's like, nope, you're in the college like prep world. Like, nope, you go that way. And like most of my friends were in that world, and I just like I remember it feeling really like frustrating and unfair then, but I couldn't really articulate or understand why. And now that I see the crisis of trades and the sort of devaluing and disrespect of the trades in our culture right now, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I was feeling. So yeah, no, it was really, I had some incredible mentors while I was building my house. A man, Will Moses, who lived up on my road that taught me a lot about carpentry. Remy Grattan, who's a multi-generational Vermonter who kind of came from a construction family, who was my sort of answer guy. I'd go to dinner at his place with 50 questions and he'd cross off 20 of them and add 5 more. And that was my homework. And so
did they think you were crazy the way you wanted to build, or were they into it? I mean, I think folks who've grown up in the residential construction world think what you do is a little odd.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean to be critical. It's just, it's different.
It's totally legit. Anytime you're doing something different in the face of really established practice, especially in a high risk environment, like it's worthy of criticism and you know, critical, maybe not worthy of criticism, but certainly worthy of critical examination for sure. So yeah, no, I welcome that. I think they both, neither of them are really familiar. Neither of them are familiar at all with straw construction. I think they both had varying degrees of sort of interest and openness around, you know, alternate ways of construction, and really just provided an opportunity for me to defend my concepts. Sometimes when I was able to do that, they're like, yeah, I get it. I mean, I can say for sure that, you know, the more production minded and more sort of classically industry oriented folks are like, yeah, you like, that seems irrelevant in the industry, but it seems like it would make sense for your house, so go for it. And you know, they're not altogether wrong. I mean, we've been doing custom in-field straw construction for quite a long time, and yeah, that's just a really hard thing to like catch fire and take over an industry. It's not going to spread that way. And again, some of the interest in us doing prefabricated assemblies is that it's less about like this weird, crazy thing, and more like, yeah, you're stuffing a box with. You could stuff it with shredded newspaper. You could stuff it with shredded wood fiber. You could stuff it with shredded ag fiber. Like stuff it with whatever you want. That's not going to destroy us all in the next 30 years. And like, great, it could be that simple. So that's, I think, some of where the pivot has come. But in terms of their initial, suspicions, I think, you know, they were open to me being able to come up with good answers to their questions. And when I was, and the proof is in the pudding, the house performs incredibly well. And for a total novice with very poor design skills being able to pull this off, I convinced myself that like, okay, yeah, this could have failed 100 times over and just absolutely hasn't. So that speaks to the resiliency of the materials.
Was it inexpensive? Was that part of the? I mean, you said you were homesteading, which tells me that you didn't have a lot of money. Was that part of the reason for straw bale and plaster? And
yeah, it was actually an intersection of different priorities that sort of led to straw as the logical conclusion. It wasn't my initial interest. I wasn't like, oh, it's always been about straw, and I just had this romantic idea around straw. That wasn't really what led for me. And I find myself talking a lot of people out of working with straw when they have like preconceived notions and ideas around it that just don't fit their goals. So yeah, it was a logical solution. There's the things that really won me. When I worked in a home office, there's a series of straw bale buildings at the Ten Stones community in Charlotte, which were some of the oldest straw bale buildings in our region.
We should tell folks that is a alternative construction development. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, I know there's a series of different buildings there, so they're not all alternative, but a lot of the early ones were.
Yeah.
And yeah, intentional community featuring in Charlotte, featuring a lot of wacky buildings and some architects involved in the beginning there with some really cool ideas, doing some cool buildings for sure. So I worked in a home office in one of those buildings and just really fell in love with the entire experience, the aesthetics, the depth of the wall, giving this sort of third dimension of artistic expression with window wells and just the texture of the plaster, the way it plays with light, the comfort and experience being inside the home. Like that was just so compelling.
Hmm.
My wife being chemically sensitive was just really critical that we worked with non-toxic materials. And that was an in. Honestly, as an owner builder, I just straight up felt really intimidated by both the sort of chauvinist culture and the like right and wrong way to do things with conventional construction. I'm just like, that felt super inaccessible and intimidating to me as like a young person without formal training. And whereas this was like, cool, this is really straightforward and it's kind of iconoclastic and there isn't anyone saying that it's right or wrong and there's plenty of room for experimentation, and it seemed that there was the margins were relatively generous with success. And yeah, so the combination of all those things was sort of what made it accessible. And honestly, it was just super important for me to build as locally as possible. And again, I came from a sustainable ag kind of background, and all the same values around eat local and like the farm to table movement. And that was like the early, the days of NOFA Vermont before it was part of the National Organic Program. So there's just a really strong culture and movement around local food and food access and food sovereignty in our region. And that all translated to me for building pretty directly. So being able to work with an agricultural product and keep my money invested in local community and local land-based producers was like super important. And yeah, oh great, so we have straw. Okay, let's work with that. It sounds a little simplistic, but that was definitely a big part of what drove it for me.
My conversation with Ace like led to an epiphany that homes could be carbon negative. Like in my head, there was never any. I never thought that was a possibility. Right? They're very. I think you'd agree, carbon intensive generally. Was that one of the early goals? Did that come later? Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, I don't think that. I will say when I built my first house here, the critical importance of climate impact and the sort of our role in building to address that wasn't fully on my radar. This was 99, 2000 when I started getting going. I knew climate change was a thing, but I hadn't really made that link. It was shortly thereafter. Really, once I really started getting into it after building my own house and really started understanding the climate crisis more directly and the role of sort of building within it, it was really clear early on that there was a link there. And then I would say it was not too far after that. I think we're still somewhere in the 2000s where I came across the inventory of carbon and energy. Maybe that was in the early teens, the early 20 teens, where some of the first information around embodied energy started kind of getting out there, and all of a sudden we were able to quantify it. And it was like, oh yeah, this thing we've been saying forever, that it's like, for us, it was largely translated as a local thing, and it was transportation impact. It was the big, like, oh yeah, we build these bales right here, and take very, I live in an agricultural environment. I see the tractors spin around the fields with a mower and then bale them. Like, there's no major factories, there's no smokestacks, there's no plumes. So like I had that like empirical understanding and knew that the processing and transportation was really low, and like that was really attractive. And in my early straw bale classes that I teach in Yestermar, we'd sort of talk about that, but we didn't have any information, like any data or quantifiable like data to be able to back that up or compare it to anything else. So it was always just this like soft benefit or this sort of, theory or obviously this is a low impact piece. It was just like a value or quality until we finally had enough data to be like, oh yeah, no, actually that thing that we've said is this like super light on the planet, like easy to produce local material is actually like a critical solution in terms of our climate response as an industry. And that's really when it went from a good idea and this sort of like soft benefit that we couldn't really value and snapped into a data-driven reality.
Hmm. So do your clients come to you pretty informed about what you guys do? Do they ever want things that you just have to say, I'm sorry, you're not the right fit for our company. We just don't do the kind of building that you want done?
Yeah, that's a great question. At this point, I think our sort of our market is pretty well established, that folks find us because they know what we do.
Is it easier in Vermont than you think it might be elsewhere?
I mean, we have a beautiful little bubble here in the Northeast. That's something I've grown to realize. As a native Vermonter that's never really left or practiced too far outside of the state in my construction practice, as I've been getting way more in the design side, I'm doing a lot of consulting for commercial projects, and we're taking on more design clients from outside of our immediate region, and realizing like, oh wow, yeah, we're not also blessed with this, sort of like heavily like Nessie informed, information sharing, collaborative, like let's all support each other to like moving the industry forward type of mentality. Like I really get that is not a universal experience in our building industry. So yeah, I mean, I think we're extra special, blessed in this region to have enough of a market established that allows us to be somewhat selective. That said, we definitely have. I mean, our building performance team works on like all sorts of projects. And just to like be super clear, because I think there's a bit of like a mythology that's built up around new frameworks that, all of our projects are made of straw, and all of our poop smells like roses, and we put spray foam in rubble wall foundations in buildings like as a regular practice because
there's little else to do, right?
That's what we got. Like that's what the economy and the physics and the available material profile offers us, and that's what we need to do. And I've run the numbers 6 times from Sunday on a dozen different buildings, and every time it is better for the planet and the building and the occupants from a health and a emissions standpoint to put an HFO-based foam in those critical applications than to do nothing. So just to be really clear, like it's, I mean, I would love to not have to do that. And there have been projects where we've done foam-free solutions at like a significant cost expense because the clients have preferred that. And there's plenty of times where we've made those moves. Where it comes for us in terms of like drawing those lines, we definitely have those conversations up front. We often find there are folks that I don't think we've ever had someone that's like asked for something that we've just said no to. There's actually, just to be clear, again, there's very few things that are like a hard no, like HFC foam, XPS, like it's a few materials that we won't work with. And there's performance qualities that we won't drop below in terms of the quality of the performance of our enclosures. So if we have some of those just internal standards for what our minimums are, but it's rare. Like I can't even think of a time where we've like lost a client because like we're not willing to compromise on that thing for you. I mean, it really more comes down to if folks aren't like again, it's not just about the materials for us. Like our number one piece, I'd say more than materials, is relationships and developing like really good relationships with our clients and having an integrated design build process and delivering not just like a good quality product, but having the experience feel like positive and affirming and not like conflict oriented. Like we have really good communication, like those, we bring that craft to our sort of project management and that process as well. And there's and it costs more because it takes more time than the absolute cheapest way to create a building. And so speaking for our market that's in the more of the custom design, custom build part of things, really it's just for folks that don't necessarily need that level of service. And like, this one, a house, they don't really care about the process. And like, if it hits these like metrics, like boom, they can get it done. Like, oh, there's probably folks that can just bang that out faster that don't bring that same level of like craft to the relationship building side in the custom world. But, for the building performance team, like we're not really developing long-term relationships with folks on, 8-month to 2-year projects. If you look at the whole design build cycle, like we're getting in there and improving their home and answering some specific problems in a really short period of time. And, we've yet to find someone that has like asked for something. They're like, nope. We don't really like doing vinyl siding. And if someone needs to go that route and they're like, great, find somebody, but like beyond that, it's not really been a barrier. Yeah.
Thanks, Jacob. You were great, man.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Tune in next week for the second half of our 2-part interview with Jacob Racusin. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive, and thanks for listening.